We're continuing Shuka's explanation of Bharata's riddle or analogy about conventional life, critique of conventional life. It's the analogy of the wild forest. So today we're going to cover Shuka's explanations of the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th texts in there. So let's read those one more time. Just a minute. 6, 7. Let's actually read the whole thing just for the sake of YouTube. We'll read this only in English. The teacher said, a profit-seeking merchant is looking for... The teacher is Bharata. And this is the analogy that's going to be explained. A profit-seeking merchant is looking for ways to increase income, reduce expense, and sustain himself. Stumbling on a very dangerous road, he enters it, driven by delusion. Traversing it fearfully, he wanders into the wilderness of existence. Misguided and bewildered by his desires, 6 scammers plunder him, and wolves dressed as sheep steal his reserves. He finds a cave-like thicket of vines, grass, and bushes. There, insects trouble him with stings and bites. Sometimes he thinks he sees an angelic city. Here and there he chases glowing ghosts. He runs here and there in the wilderness, trying to secure resources, water, and a better home. This raises a whirlwind dust cloud which gets in his eyes, and he loses his way. He tries to rest, but the sounds of unseen wasps unsettle his heart, and the voices of owls pierce his ears like spears. When hunger overpowers him, he sees mirages and chases them. Sometimes he seeks the shelter of evil trees. Now, this is the text from which we'll start to get the explanation today. So these things will be explained today. The previous things were all explained in the previous couple of weeks that we've been doing this. Going to a river, he finds no water. Left without even food to eat, he troubles others for help. Sometimes the forest in which he shelters subjects him to fire. Sometimes he loses all signs of life when monstrous forest guardians take away whatever he has. When people stronger than him take his things, his heart becomes hopeless. He is so immersed in lamentation that he faints and seems almost dead. Yet sometimes he enters a heavenly palace and becomes carefree and detached for a little while. He wants to climb a mountain, but his feet meet thorns and stones and he feels humiliated. At every step, his own inner fire troubles him, and he becomes cruel to his own family. Sometimes he is seized by a python and loses consciousness, unaware of anything in the forest, but sometimes the snakes bite him and he just lies there. Blind by their venom, he falls into a pit. Okay, so this will be explained. 6, 7, 8, and 9. So we're going to start with the explanation of going to a river, he finds no water. So that's today's stuff. Sounds like me, somebody said. Ekada sat prasangat nikrita matir vyudaka shrotaha skalanavat ubayatopi dukkadam pakandam abhiyati. The story describes him going to dry rivers after eating the poison fruits of bad trees. I don't know if I really need to put that in there, do I? So in other words, here's his story. He found a house in the forest, but it was full of insects, so he was interested in finding something better. And he thought he saw some good stuff here and there, and he started to chase it. But in chasing better things in life, he starts to lose his sense of what's forward, what's backwards, what's left, and what's right. He raises dust. The passion of life gets in his eyes, and he loses sight of what's really forward and what's really backwards, gets confused about where he is, loses track of where his home is. Now he's stuck in the forest. And then he gets hungry, so he tries to eat from the forest, but that fruit is poisonous. So then he tries to get relief by going to the So in the forest, when he's lost, he tries to take shelter of a tree and eat the fruit and be safe, right? But that makes him poisonous. So then he tries to go to a river to flush out the poisons. But the rivers are dry. So that's called Vyudakashrota, a dry river. This represents how we approach imposter guides, pakandam, to get relief from our problems. These guides only... I don't know, is that necessary either? It's kind of obvious why you... This represents how we approach imposter guides. These guides only reduce our intellect and give distress both in the present and the future. So the dry river. The river is something from which you should get water. Water should be healthy. It should nourish you. It should get rid of poisons. It should purify you. Water should clean you. But not if it's a dry river, right? Vyudakashrota means it doesn't really have water. Skalanavad, he just stumbles onto it. So that's our problem. We do this all the time. I'm guilty of it. Everybody's guilty of it. We just go to the first doctor that we find in the phone book. We just go to the first therapist that we see a sign for. We just, by fate, we chance across the books of Osho, and so we accept Osho as the guru. Or by chance, we come across the books of ISKCON, so we accept Prabhupada as the guru. It's just Skalanavat. By chance, we just wind up with somebody that's supposed to improve our life. L. Ron Hubbard or John Robbins or whoever it is. We don't really investigate. We don't really take care and be careful about whether or not this river actually has water in it. You just search astrology on YouTube and you wind up somewhere. And then you pay attention to it as if it's worthy of your attention, but you've done no research into this source of water, source of information. So what actually happens, nikrita mati, instead of nourishing the mati, nourishing the decision-making capacity, nourishing the intelligence, nikrita, it devolves the intelligence. The more we listen to people who actually don't make sense, but we try to make sense out of their teachings, the more senseless we become. The more confused we become. The more confusing we become. So that's what happens in this story. He goes to the river to try to get purified from the poison from the bad trees. Right? That means from his asat prasanga. That's from the association of the bad trees. So he got poisoned by that. That's symbolic to trying to get help in your life from people who are criminals or people like banks, people that exploit you. The poison trees represented the banks, the credit cards, even the beauty salons and things like that are going to make you into the thing that you wish you always were, but they're not. They're just going to take your money and you're still going to be you. So then trying to get relief from that, he tries to go to somebody that can purify him. He tries to get some knowledge. But it's a dry river. So what does he get instead? Ubhayata dukkha. He gets duk. Duk means suffering, sadness. From both sides, what does it mean? both sides can mean, generally it means now and later. In the present and in the future. And now and later can mean this life and the next life. Now it can be short term and long term. So in other words, you go to a guide and you expect the guide will give you some long term benefit, at least, if not short term. Like you go to church and the church guy will convince you that you'll go to heaven. Or you go to some priest, Hindu priest, and they'll convince you that your next life will be great. Or you go to some exercise pro and they'll convince you that in 52 weeks you'll look like a model. So they sell you something about the future, but because they're dry rivers, the future is going to disappoint and the present is going to disappoint. Make sense? Makes too much sense. Now, then it says that he troubled others, right? Yada. So now he's hopeless. He can't find any way of bettering himself, saving himself. So he asks other people to save him. Yada tu para badayanda atmane nopanamati. Sada hi pitriputra barhishmata pitriputran va sakhalu bhakshyati. The story said he then troubles others for help in his terrible plight. So that's just like us. When we just wake up in the morning, or when we're kids, we think we're going to be astronauts, we think we're going to be the president of the United States, we think we're going to be wealthy businessmen, we think we're going to have a fancy house and fancy car, etc. When we grow up, we try to get the jobs, nobody hires us, we try to get ahead, nobody recognizes us, we try to do something great, but we make mistakes. And then we try to find people to help us, but they don't help us. We try to take loans, but we just get in more debt. We try to find guides, but they just don't know what the hell they're talking about. So then we come to this situation where we realize that we just need help. So then what do? Then we turn to our dad. Then we turn to our parents. Or if we're old, then we turn to our kids. And Badaya, in astrology, in some systems of astrology, they say the Lord of the 4th and 11th is Bhadaka. Bhadaka means somebody that gets in the way. So, because it's converse to the Yogacark. The Yogacar is the Lord of the 5th and 9th. That's somebody that assists. And the converse to that would be the Lord of 4th and 11th, is the Bhadaka. So you see that same word here, Parabhadaka. Pada means other people. Parabhadaka means you become a burden on other people for your own sake, because you can't help yourself. Atmane na upana mati. This represents how we treat people, like our father or children, pitri putra. We flatter and worship them. Barhishmata. Barhishmata is a very interesting word, because literally it means grass. But it's a particular kind of grass which is essential in worship, Vedic worship. Remember King Barhishat? The one who grew kusha grass all over the world because he was doing so much Vedic sacrifice. So Barhishmata means grass. So it's an interesting double entendre in this word. We treat them like grass, but we treat them like sacred grass. That means that they're not really so important to us. But we pretend that they're important. We flatter them. We worship them. We flatter them. Then all of a sudden, the child loves the parent. The child was off doing his own thing, doing her own thing, didn't want to be bothered by phone calls or whatever. But then all of a sudden, when they have no way to get what they want to get, then they call up. Hey, I miss you. How are you doing? How's mom? Husband? I need like about $1,000. Would that be okay? or if you're older, then you'll do that to your kids. Hey, how are you guys doing? I couldn't really pay the bills. Can you help me out? But before that, you're just into your ground golf or whatever else it is that you do in old age. Pitri putra barhishmata va pitri putran sakalu bhakshyati. Bhakshyati is another interesting word. It means eat. So the actual intention of the person is to just eat their kids or to eat their parents, meaning they want to use up all the parents' resources or they want to use up their kids' resources. They can't take care of themselves anymore. They're old people. They want the kids to change their diapers. So this is part of the story here where he, after being bewildered or something by the rivers, he just realizes there's no place else to go for help. He needs to turn to his father or to his kids. But he doesn't do, it's not like he loves his father or his kids. He's just using them. So that's why he's called a burden to them. So that's why you notice that if the parents can send the money, then the kids love the parents. But if they can't, then they complain about the parents. If the kids can do what the parents want, then the parents love the kids. But if the kids refuse or can't do what the parents idealized for them or wanted, then they dislike the kids. They feel mad at the kids. They get angry at the kids. Now, the next thing in the story. So this is what we got so far, the riddle. Going to a river, he finds no water. Left without even food to eat, he troubles others for help. Sometimes the forest in which he shelters subjects him to fire. Now this, Shuka will explain this. Kvachit asadyagriham davat priyarthavdhuram asukhodarkam shogagnina dahyamano pusham niredam upagachati. The story said when he finally finds shelter in the forest, it catches fire. The forest is like our homes. The fire is the various misfortunes that can befall the wealth we protect in our homes. Suffering the flames is like the tears and dejection we experience thereby. So then it said, finally, after seeking somebody's help, he finally got some help. He got a place in the forest to live again. Remember, the story is, he came into the forest, he found a place to live. Now, it wasn't the best place to live. It had bugs. So he was looking ahead down the road and he thought he saw some better stuff, so he went out chasing it and then he got lost. Then when he's lost, he tries to live amongst the trees, but he gets poisoned by them. And then he tries to get healthy from the rivers, but they run out of water. Then he turns to his parents and his kids for help. And then they manage to give him a place in the forest where he can live. So now he's got a second house. But now it catches fire. So what's that all about? Why does it catch fire? What does that represent in the story? He says, that's the griha. And the fire in the forest is like the fire in the house. Griham dava. Griham dava means that the house is like the forest that he finds in. And he says, Priyartha viduram. What is the house? As George Carlin says, the house is a place for your stuff. Griha actually means that. It's a place where you can hold onto your stuff. It's like it's a holding for your place, for your stuff. So what do you do with the house? Well, because you have a house, you have a place to put a couch. You have a place to put a TV. You can put a computer. It won't get destroyed by the rain. You can put a bed. You can put nice things here in the house. So the house becomes like a little treasure chest that protects all your stuff. Priyartha vidhuram. It keeps all of your precious wealth safe. But the worries of the threats to the house cause so much anxiety. Maybe somebody will rob us. Maybe the house will burn. Maybe there'll become a leak in the house. Maybe we won't be able to continue paying for the house. Those kind of worries are the Shok Agni. The Agni in the story, the fire in the story, is that discomfort, shoka, the unease about trying to keep this house afloat. And then when a misfortune befalls the house, then it's a great misfortune because all of the treasures were kept inside the house. And that's when you burn in the fire. I love how these positive stories. Then the next part in the story is going to a river he finds in the water, left without even food to eat, he troubles others for help. Sometimes the forest in which he shelters subjects him to fire. Sometimes he loses all signs of life when monstrous forest guardians take away whatever he has. This is the next thing. Even if you keep your house safe, you have property tax. That's what this actually is. The forest guardians, Kvichit Kala Vishamita Rajkula Rakshasapahritta Priyatama Dhanasu Pramritaka Iva Vigata Jiva Lakshana Aste. The story said he loses all signs of life when the monstrous forest guardians take away what he has. These guardians represent the government, Rajakula, who sometimes seem hostile. Kala Vishamita. Vishamita means hostile. Kala, sometimes, at times. At times the government seems really nice when they pay for your hospital bill or something like that. But at times the government seems really inimical when they take your money away in taxes. Or when they tell you that you have to knock down this thing that you built because it's not up to code or you didn't get permission for it. These guardians represent the government who sometimes seem hostile because they take away, through taxes and fines, the wealth we give our life to gaining. So that's why it's said that he becomes bereft of signs of life. He becomes so depressed. He put all of his effort into making money, and then the government takes 20% of it. He put all of it, but, and I mean, I'm not complaining about this personally. I'm just telling you what it feels like. The government takes 20% of it because they do an immense amount of work. But that's what it feels like. It feels like, I need this money, and why are you taking this money away from me? Now I have to pay the government? Or they fine you, or they tax you, or whatever. That's the Rakshasa. See, the word Rakshasa is also an interesting word because it actually means protect. Raksha. Raksha means to protect. Rakshasa means a protector. But Rakshasa also means an ogre. Or in Japan we call it the Oni. The Oni is a gigantic forest monster. That's what a Rakshasa is. So why does it mean these two things, the protector and the monster? It's because the monsters protect they protect nature from humans. They keep humans out of the deep forest. So that's why they're monstrous protectors. But the government is just like that. They're Rakshasa. Because they're protectors, but they're monsters also. They protect us by killing people, for example. They protect us by taking all our money, for example. Now, this bit about the getting a temporary relief. This part is text 7. Shurai Ritaswa Kwacha Nirvinna Cheta Shochan. This actually goes on a little bit longer. When people stronger than him take his things, it's just, he didn't actually explain all of this, but this is like other people besides the government. His heart becomes hopeless. He's so immersed in lamentation that he faints and seems almost dead. Now the next thing that he's going to explain is this. Yet sometimes he enters a heavenly palace and becomes carefree and delighted for a little while. So the explanation of that. Kadachin manoratopagata pitri pitamahadi asat sat iti swapna nivritti lakshanam anubhavati. The story described a heavenly place, a heavenly palace, that grants him temporary respite and relief. This symbolizes the relief we experience in our dreams and aspirations or fantasies to achieve something our fathers and forefathers were unable to achieve. Manorata upagata nivritti, swapna nivritti lakshana. In a dream, swapna, you get nivritti. Nivritti means you can relax, you get relief. So you get the quality of relief that we get from our dreams, which doesn't just mean the dreams when we're asleep, but it also means the daydreams or the fantasies. So what do we get? What can we do in our dreams and our fantasies? We can do amazing things, the things that we really want. Manoratupagata. We could do whatever we want. On the chariot of the mind, we can go wherever we want. And particularly, what does he want? Pitra, pitamaha, adi, asat, sat. What was impossible, asat, for Pitri, for his father and forefathers, pitamaha, will be sat, will be possible for him. Like Dhruva, as a child, Dhruva had this basic aspiration. What's impossible for my father and my grandfather will be possible for me. Dreaming about being able to be better than your ancestors, to achieve something that no one in your family has ever achieved, to achieve something that nobody in your neighborhood achieved, to achieve something that none of your friends achieved, to achieve something that no one in your species have ever achieved before. Those are the kind of things that we can fantasize about, whether asleep or awake. And those fantasies give us moments of relief, like an imaginary palace. So in the story, although he's sitting there suffering, eating poison fruit, going to a dry river, finding a place to live in the forest, but then catching on fire, but where does he get his relief? By dreaming. By thinking that all this stuff keeps happening to me, but one day it won't. One day I'll find a way to live in this forest without the fire. I know that no one before me has done this, but I can do it. Thank you, Red. Very nice Flatlander. Now let's see what the next thing is. Well, that's that section. Now he's going to move on to text 8. Text 8 talked about how he wants to climb a mountain. The story's Kvachit grihashrama karma chodannati bharagirim arurukshamana loka vyasana karshita mana kantaka sharkara kshetram pravishanniva sidati. The story said he wants to climb a mountain. This represents the aspiration to maintain a home like our neighbors do. The many obligations and duties that beset us in this endeavor are like a very big hill covered in fields of stones and thorns. So let's just read this. He wants to climb a mountain, but his feet meet thorns and stones, and he feels humiliated. At every step, his own inner fire troubles him, and he becomes cruel to his own family. So, grihashrama karma means the work to build a studio for your family. Grihashrama. The work to build a place for your stuff. The work to build a place where you can live and prosper and thrive. Chodaya. Chodana. Chodana means stirred by, impelled by, pushed by, ordered by. So impelled by the urge to have a place. So that he realizes, I don't want to live here in the forest anymore. I want to live in a safe place. I want to go live on the top of the mountain where there's not fires and there's not bugs and there's not these dry rivers. And why does he think that way? He thinks that way because lok vyasana karshita mana, because his mind is karshita, pulled to loka vyasana. Loka means the other people, the world, the community. And vyasana means the way they live. So his mind is pulled by seeing the way other people live. He thinks, why am I the only one sleeping under a bridge? Why do these people have cars? Why do these people go to restaurants where I have to look in a garbage pail for food? Why should it be like that? I will also be able to get a house. I'll also build a house. Or if he already has a house, he thinks, why does my neighbor have 3 rooms in his house and I only have 2? Why does my neighbor have a new car and I have an old car? Why do all these people have successful kids but I have failures? All these things push us. Karshta, actually, they pull us. All these things pull our minds to try to get what other people have. Because it looks nice. Why does it look nice? Because the only thing that we really know is that we're not happy. We're not satisfied. And that our satisfaction runs away in a second. So, therefore, we think something else must work. And those people over there, maybe that's what works. Maybe that's what works. This person is doing this. Maybe that's what's working. So we think maybe I actually need a swimming pool. Maybe I need central air. Maybe I need a new jacket or better shoes. Kvachit grihashrama karma chodana. That's how you get impelled or pushed by the work required to build your studio of the home bigger. And it's like Ati Bharagiri. It's just like a very big hill or a mountain. Arurukshamana. The desire to climb up that. Wanting to climb up that very big hill to be able to do. I have a friend who has a bowling alley in his house. An indoor pool, a bowling alley. What else does he have? Elevator. I mean, this house is all incredible. So somebody else might look at that and think, I want that, I want that. Then to get from where you are now in your rented house to this house with a bowling alley and an indoor pool and all this stuff, it requires so much effort. That's why it's described as a mountain that you have to climb. And then the troubles in climbing the mountain are the stones and the thorns. Kantaka, thorns. Sharkara, sharp pebbles. kshetra, a field full of them. It also, if you try to build a house, and you usually build a little garden or a farm. But if your field is full of thorns and pebbles and stones, you have a lot of work before you can grow edible things there. Right? So it's a lot of work. He sets off to build a house, but he finds himself on a plot of land with thorns and stones, and he has to climb to the top of the hill full of those thorns and thorns. So he becomes Viman. He loses his pride, and he just thinks, I guess I'm just worthless. I can't have a house with a bowling alley. But then, because of that self-loathing or self-hatred, he hates others. Or also because of the stress and extreme exhaustion that he suffers as a result of trying to build a house, he becomes angry and lashes out at others. So that's the other part of the story, which is at every step his own inner fire troubles him, and he becomes cruel to his own family. It's this ironic. We wanted to build a nice big house. For what? For our people to live in, right? But then when we get subjected to all the difficulties of creating that house and maintaining it and building it and supporting it, then we start to hate the people for whom we built it for, as if they made us build it. Kvachit sadushasena. Dushasena. Kvachit cha Dushasena. This is Dushasan, Duryodhana's brother's name. Dushasan. Kvachit cha Dushasena kayabhyantara vahina grihita sara swakutumbaya krudiyati. His reaction to the intolerable pain of his effort is why the story says his inner fire makes him cruel to his own family. See, his inner fire, his aspiration, there's many meanings in this really. His aspiration makes him hate his family. He was the one who desired to give his wife the most beautiful car on the block. But now he hates her for it. But it was his desire to be the great husband that made it that he should hate. The other thing is his own hunger makes him hate his family. That also means that he will eat first before them. So because he can't deal with all this pain and suffering, he becomes desperate. And then he won't support his people that he needs to support. He'll take their stuff for his own. Yeah. Very depressing. Seeing everyone else maintaining a family and home, he tries to do the same, suffering so much inconvenience because of his ambition to be equal to or better than him. He blames his pain on his family and home and becomes hateful and cruel to them. What kind of cruel? Won't take care of them. Now finally, we hear about the python and the snakes and the pit. So what part of the story is that? He wants to climb a mountain. That's that part. And then this part, text 9. Sometimes he's seized by a python and loses consciousness, unaware of anything in the forest. But sometimes the snakes bite him and he just lies there. Blind by his venom, he falls into a pit. Here's Shuka's explanation of this. Saeva punar nidra jagara grihito Andhe tamasi magnaha shunyaranyaiva shete nanyat kinchana veda shava iva apa vidaha. The story says he is seized by a python and loses consciousness. This python represents sleep, in whose grasp we are submerged in darkness and indolence. We become like a corpse lying in a forest of void and completely unaware of anything else. So what does he do when the work of the day exhausts him? The work of trying to climb the mountain? In the story, what does he do? He gets so angry at everybody for being forced to climb this mountain to try to get a better house, that he gets grumpy, and then he just storms off and goes up to a python and lets the python wrap itself around him and squeeze him until he becomes unconscious. That's how it's described in the story. What it means is, when we get frustrated, we just want to sleep. Sleep is one way to get out of the frustration. One way to get out of the frustration is dream, fantasy, aspiration. The other way is just plain sleep. So punar means he does it again and again. So eva punar nidra ajagara. This ajagara, this python, is nidra, sleep. The grasp of the python, ajagara grihito. The grasp of the python represents sleep, punar, which he goes into again and again. And when he's asleep, andha, it's totally dark. Tamasi, he doesn't have anything to do. Magna, he gets submerged in that. Like being in a shunyaranya, a forest of emptiness, a forest of void, which is a relief for him. Shete nanyat kinchana. And when he's lying like that, he doesn't know anything. Like a corpse that's been forgotten. So he goes to this python to get relief. But what is the relief? He's just getting squeezed unconscious. Kadachit bhagna mana dangstro durjana danda shukar alabda nidrakshano vyathita hridayena anu kshiyamana vigyano andakupe andavat patati. So the thing that's about the python is pythons don't bite. They don't have venom. They just squeeze and constrict, and then they swallow. So that python is sort of semi-friendly in the story, but there's other snakes that have fangs. So sometimes, although he wants to go to a python, he winds up finding only snakes, fanged snakes, venomous snakes. So what's that like? Durjana. Those snakes are Durjana, evil people or enemies, people that oppose him. Durjana means bad, and Durjana also means foreigners, far off people who are enemies, people that are not in your camp. Durjana danda shukaya. Danda shukaya means a skin shedder, so it's a word for a snake. Dangstra means bitten by the fangs. Bhagnamana. The mana is the pride. The mental image of oneself is the mana. Bhagna, broken. So sometimes the rivals, the competitors, the bad people, etc., the people who are our enemies, they are the snakes in the story that bite us, and that bite destroys our pride, breaks our pride. And then alabda nidrakshano. The result is that he can't sleep. So the function of sleep is to refresh us. And there's two states of sleep. One is dreaming and one is dreamless. The dreamless one is much more refreshing than the dreaming one even. But if you can't get into that state, then you become very unhealthy. If you can't get into dreamless sleep, you become very unhealthy very soon. And what is it that's the thing that prevents us most of all from entering that state? It's injuries in the mind. Because the mind is the only thing that will become active when we sleep. So we fear to sleep because we fear what would happen when the mind is in control. People who have injuries in their mind have subconscious fear of sleeping because the mind is a painful thing. It's holding painful stuff. So when the mind was bitten by venom, then he doesn't want to fall asleep. He resists sleep. Then he can't sleep. So in the story, it symbolizes he went out looking for the python, but instead he got bit by a snake. Just lying there is insomnia, alabdha nidra, insomnia. And then he becomes blind from that insomnia. So actually in the story, he goes to look for a python, but he gets bit by a different kind of snake along the way, and then he becomes blind. So that's because if you can't sleep, then your mind, actually there's two stages to sleep. The first stage is when you dream. And then the second stage is when you don't even dream. So generally what sleep does is it detaches consciousness from the tools that it uses. It uses two layers of tools. One is mental or subtle tools, and the other is tangible or physical tools. So immediately, upon falling asleep, crossing the threshold that we call sleep, immediately the active connection between consciousness and body becomes muted to an extreme. It almost disconnects. And the reason for that is that therefore the body at that point can do its own thing. The other entities in the body can then do their own thing. They don't have to receive orders anymore. And therefore they can just repair themselves. So sleep is necessary for the physical body to repair itself. But that will also work in dreaming sleep. It won't work as well, but it will still work in dreaming sleep. But the mental bodies, the mental tools, the intellect, the mind, the emotions, they also need rest. They also need a chance to be left alone. So it's not until consciousness withdraws from the mental tool that we enter the thing called deep sleep. And if we don't enter that thing called deep sleep, the mind doesn't get any rest. And if the mind doesn't get any rest, it gradually gets exhausted and tired. And then the ability to think, the ability to remember, the ability to make decisions becomes more and more impaired the more and more you have that type of insomnia. So that's why the story describes him looking for sleep, getting bit by a snake, and then becoming blind. Then it says when he gets up, andakupe patati. He fell into a ditch. Andakupa. Usually people translate it as blind well, but what is there kind of a well that has eyes and sees? It's not really a blind well, but it's a hole in the ground that you don't see. I remember when this would be about 15 years ago. Almost 20 years ago, I was in Dalmatia, Croatia, in my wife's ancestral home, walking along this road. And then all of a sudden, my son was gone. 6 years old. All of a sudden, he's there, and then he's gone. So what happened was there was andakupa. There was a hole in the ground that was just covered up with weed. It was covered up with grasses and weeds. Nobody saw it. Not even him. But he stepped into it and then whoop. So of course we found him in a second and pulled him out. And actually, because he's a very unique living being, he had many of these incidents in his life. He doesn't even have a scratch on his body. But that's an example of andakup. You really only fall into Andhakupa when you forget that there's possibilities for Andhakupa, when your alertness is low. When your alertness is high, then you realize I shouldn't walk here because maybe there's a hole here, right? In my son's case, he was not to blame. He's like 6 years old, but we were pretty dumb, letting him walk on the side of the road instead of on the road. So that's what's meant by Andhakup, the kind of hole that you can't see. So what does that represent? That represents when we awake and try to do anything, we do it poorly and fail. So that's what it is in the story. This part of the story is showing the importance of getting good rest. If you get good rest, well, in a sense, that's a waste of time. I mean, in the BBT commentary on this verse, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami says you shouldn't sleep because it's like being consumed, wrapped up in this python. But if you don't sleep, you become like the man in the story. So really the story is not saying that you shouldn't sleep. The story is saying this man can't sleep. Sleep is essential for your health, mental and physical health. And if you don't sleep enough, you're not going to be sharp. So he can't sleep because he's always thinking about how he's been insulted or how he might be insulted or how he's been attacked or how he might be attacked. And that worry has infected his mind and it won't let him go to sleep. And because it won't let him go to sleep, he becomes blind, or in other words, his mental facility becomes dull. And then when he gets up and tries to walk, he falls into a hole. So in the story, he tries to find a python. Usually he finds a python, but sometimes he doesn't. Regular snakes come and bite him. And then from the poison of their bite, he just lies down, but he can't fall asleep. And then from the poison of the bite, when he gets back up, he walks into a hole. Okay? Any questions? This is one of those stories that's depressing and negative all the way through to the very end. Don't look for some kind of light at the end of the tunnel or something. It's just a critique of our life, and that's all it is. What does venom mean here? Venom is the effect of when somebody insults you, or the stuff in the mind that's not healthy. Stuff in the mind that's not healthy, like the effect of being insulted, the reaction of being insulted, the feeling, the worry, how we plan out how to get back at the person, or things we should have said or would have said or will say, things we should have done or would have done or will do. That's all the venom that sits in the mind. Alf's drained by the story. Kermit asks, Kermit, it's good to see you. Dream-inclusive sleep gives rest, but not more than dreamless sleep. And the refreshing quotient sustains longer, but it also ends. So is there anything deeper that sustains even that? I feel that this is a leading question. I feel like Kermit the Frog knows that there is indeed a fourth state. But why not talk about it? Thanks to Kermit the Frog for bringing this up. So actually there are three conventional states of consciousness. There's three conventional states of awareness. One is Jagara, which is when you're awake. So that is when the consciousness is, all the tools are turned on. The consciousness is invested in the mind, and the mind is invested in the body, and we're experiencing the world. That goes on for maybe usually 16, 18 hours a day, 14 hours, 12 hours a day, most of the day, right? The second state is where the consciousness withdraws from the body and falls asleep. But it doesn't withdraw from the mind. The mind is still active. It still plays with the mind. And so that's the dreaming state. The third state is where consciousness withdraws from the mind. This is a very interesting state. It's extremely restful. It's a state where you go to when you have full anesthesia. It's a state that you go to any night, hopefully at least. And there's absolutely no experience of anything except your existence. And that's very, very restful. Then he says, is there anything deeper than that? There is something deeper than that, but it's difficult to explain because we don't have direct experience of it. And this would be to experience the entity which is providing the identity. In deep sleep, the entity is still distinct and maintaining its identity. Not a specific identity, but it's maintaining its identityness. The fourth state is, what is the entity that all of these states are based on? What is the conscious entity itself? So the fourth state is to directly experience consciousness itself directly. Adamor, why does it take so long to break out of the suffering illusions and remember? Learning to perceive and live differently is liberating. Why can't I remember this sooner? Why does it take so long to learn how to play drums? Why does it take so long for a kid to learn how to speak? Because why does it take so long for a train to stop? Why does it take so long for a boat to stop? Why does anything take not instantaneous? Because everything has momentum. And so because we have so much momentum of other ways of doing things besides the way that we're trying to adopt now. If you want to have a good golf swing, why will it take so long to get a good golf swing? Because you have momentum of doing it wrong and not much momentum of doing it right. So you have to cease doing it wrong and continue doing it right, and that builds up the momentum of doing it right. Depending on how long you've been doing it wrong, it will take that much effort. Kermit asks, so then death is euphoric because it is kind of a sleep, right? It's euphoric. Most people don't like being divested of their identity. So most people struggle against entering the deep sleep. So, people have fears of deep sleep. And there's insomniacs and they need serious therapy. And then the rest of us, luckily, we don't have that fear. But if your mind tells you you will sleep now, and when you wake up, you won't be the same body. We're leaving now. And this sleep is basically forever sleep. You're saying goodbye to this being. When the parent tells the child it's time to sleep, the child gets nervous, a very young child, because they don't want to leave the parent. And they don't want to leave who they are. But the parent reassures them, I'll be here when you wake up. And you'll be here when you wake up. But what if the parent says, when you wake up, I'll be gone, and you'll never see me again, and you'll also be somebody completely different? The child will not go to sleep. Will struggle. So death is not identical to sleep. Death is a very big sleep. And so most of us don't find it euphoric. We find it terrifying. Moreover, euphoria implies an experience. But in deep sleep and death, there's no experience. So it can't be said to be euphoric. But that's for the general mass of people. This is why some people talk about near-death experiences and all that stuff, and some people talk about nothing. Because you go through a state where you are not connected to any physical and mental apparatus, so you have no experience whatsoever. So I don't know if I would describe it as euphoric. It would be... The approach to death could be euphoric for a person who's very happy to be done with their previous self, either because of great hatred for themselves or because of a feeling of accomplishment. I did everything I wanted to do. So it really depends on the person. But that's the approach to death. But in the actual condition of death, euphoria is not possible. But the mind and self will reconnect. The mind is not left behind, but the mind reconnects with the self before Yama. And then at that point, you can have experiences again. Johnny Barker, is the Atma an autonomous entity? You may say yes or no. It can be said that the Atma is an autonomous entity because just like we can say sunlight is an autonomous thing. The Atma is an autonomous, self-sustaining, self-supporting entity. That can be said because Atma includes Paramatma. So we can say sunlight. You don't need anything to produce sunlight, but you do need the sun to produce sunlight. But the sun is part of the sunlight. Similarly, the Atma is not truly autonomous because it's dependent, its existence is dependent on Paramatma. Paramatma is autonomous. But there's also no harm in saying that the Atma is autonomous because the Paramatma is integral to the Atma. Crystal asks, so everything that happens to him must be a metaphor about our human condition, but we're not humans at the soul, so that's the bright side. Yeah, that is the bright side. The bright side is that why did Bharata tell him this depressing tale? Because he was a jerk. Because this King Rahugana was an idiot. He was a real ass. But he thought he was such a great dude. So Bharata had to wake him up and say, hey, great dude, this is what's really going on in your life. There's nothing great about it. And then this happens sometimes with, let's say, you're in a terrible marriage and your friend is telling you your marriage is terrible. You might hate the friend. I want to believe that my marriage is okay, but you may hate the friend. But the friend is trying to tell you your marriage is terrible because it is terrible. And only if you listen to the friend, then you can change it. So that's similar to these kind of negative stories that we get. Kermit the Frog says, but do we recall sleeping blissfully even though when we don't experience it in sleep? So how can we recall? So Kermit, this is an important analogy. And this proves that the self is distinct from the mind. When you wake up from a deep sleep, you will recall that you slept deeply. Just like when I woke up from anesthesia, I recalled that I was in anesthesia. But while I was in anesthesia, I didn't know that I was in anesthesia. It's after the awakening begins that one understands the experience before, because while one was in the experience before, there was nothing to experience. And so what is the nature of what one remembers? That I was just out of it. I was totally out of it. I was conked out. I couldn't remember anything. I didn't know anything. We remember that. No, I didn't know anything. Wasn't aware of anything. After we wake up from it, that shows that there's a person beyond the mind that can connect the two states, even though the two states were not congruous. Or at least the Puranas use that analogy to present that. Alf likes my analogies. Which analogy did I give now? I can't remember. Aditi asks, unless we are enlightened, can we truly be conscious every moment? No, you really can't. Yes, Stephanie, that does not sound fun. I don't want to talk about that, but that does not sound fun. All right, guys. Very cool. I respect all of you for sitting here with me for this non-backpatting discussion about our lives and the way we live them. See you again soon.